Lasse tiene una enorme experiencia en el mundo de la consultoría, acompañando a un montón de empresas internacionales. Él es de Suecia, obviamente ha trabajado con IKEA, pero también con muchas otras, con empresas de renombre a nivel global, haciendo este acompañamiento en el liderazgo, ¿no? Acompañando a las empresas en sus inicios desde el Oxford Leadership Academy, y ahora ya últimamente desde hace unos años fundando Companions for Leadership, donde promueven, especialmente cultivan en sus palabras la sabiduría en el liderazgo, ¿no? Y creo que esto tiene mucho que ver con lo que estamos haciendo aquí. Decía, es un provocador de conversaciones y de conversaciones profundas, de conversaciones con propósito, ¿no? La verdad es que cuando nos conocimos, un poco la conexión con todo lo que estamos viviendo aquí es evidente, es rapidísima, y creo que todos vosotros también conectaréis porque además es un gran orador. O sea que os dejo con Lasse.
Y antes de pasarle la palabra, yo simplemente compartir que esto que está diciendo Alex, yo tengo la suerte, porque es una fortuna, el conocerle desde hace 15 años, ¿no? Y hoy en día que se habla tanto de diversidad e inclusión, he visto a un hombre en culturas muy diversas, desde Singapur a Suecia, Latinoamérica, donde sea, y siempre conecta con lo que hay debajo. Entonces, para mí es un honor, estamos hiper agradecidos de que se haya abierto el hueco y tenerla aquí con nosotros, disfrutarle. Vale, muchas gracias.
Yes. Hello. Yes. Wow. That were great words. I heard them in the translation. So the question, I was writing down the words that came up to me being here with you. And the first was honored. Honored to be the only English speaking on this stage today, I think. The second one was excitement. A sense of excitement of seeing this movement. I had a conversation with Andrea yesterday. We were walking to the restaurant, and you talked about the work that you're doing. Very, very inspiring. And so many, when you read the news today, you get depressed, right? But there is an undercurrent in the world right now with a lot of positive things happening. And I think this movement is one. The work that we do, I think, is very much interconnected with the work that you're doing. And the third word was hope. How do we create hope? I think that's necessary right now. So, we always start with a full stop. Always start with a full stop. So let's have a moment of silence together. Just reflect, set your intention. So that is one of the leadership principles that we strongly believe in, is being present and being intentional. What is your intention? Most leaders I meet are very goal-oriented. Goal is an end point, nothing bad with that. Intention is a starting point. Have a clear intention. I don't recommend anyone to have a Tibetan ball and go back to your team and say, we're going to have a moment of silence. They might think you're an idiot. But really start pausing, and that if you don't have that practice, before you go into a meeting, you pause and you think, what is my intention here? That's very, very powerful. You probably know that already. Are you good at PowerPoint presentation in your companies? Right? No? Producing PowerPoint presentations, are you good at that? Yes, a lot, yes. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint presentation, but I'm going to show you some PowerPoint now. So let's see if this works. Wisdom Leadership for a Prosperous World. So I've been working with Oxford Leadership for more than 20 years. When we started that in the beginning of 2000, basically we had the binder in the hand, and the founder, Brian Bacon, gave us this binder, and it says, "Prepare leaders for turbulent times." That was the title. And we went to companies and what are you doing? Well, we prepare leaders for turbulent times. Well, we're doing fine. Now, it's turbulent times. We're living in turbulent times. Hyper-globalization, it's over. It's just over. The way we are thinking and looking at business and the world, it's over. So now we're going to create a new system. So we are in a transition to a new system. I think 2 ingredients. If we're not going to screw up this world, it's 2 ingredients. It's purpose and it's wisdom. If we can bring that into organizations, into politics, we're going to be fine. If not, we are basically screwed. So let me give you a little bit of big picture here. So we are in the 4th Industrial Revolution. We are in the beginning of that. So the first one was steam. The second one was electricity. The third one was computers. And now we're talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, and so forth. How many of you know ChatGPT? Yes. Have you used it? You know, suddenly it goes so fast, right? It's amazing. Whoa. Now it's here. It's just been word, artificial intelligence and so forth. Suddenly it's here. I was reading in the newspaper yesterday in Sweden that our prime minister was assassinated in '86, and now with AI they will maybe be able to solve that murder. You know, it's incredible. So we are in this space now, and if we look at organizations, still I think the most of the global organizations that I meet is still boxes. You see an organizational chart. We look at a very mechanical view on an organization. If we get these, almost like a clock, if we get these pieces together and they work together, it will serve us well. And it has done so for 150 years. Now something is shifting. In many, many organizations, we see a different shift how we look at organizations. We have a more biological view on organizations. So we're looking at it as an ecosystem, like a beehive or an ant farm. So self-organizing principles. Frederick Laloux, who wrote the book Reinventing Organizations, he talks about 3 things: self-management. He talks about wholeness. So how do we expand us as human beings? Not just one part of me, my intellectual part, but how do I develop my social intelligence? How do I develop my physical intelligence? How do I develop my spiritual intelligence? My ability to create meaning that comes from within, purpose. So how do we develop the whole person? And then he talks about the third thing is evolutionary purpose, which I really like. I like the evolutionary purpose. So maybe your organization has a purpose statement that is the same purpose statement in 100 years maybe, or in 50 years, will be the same, but you will understand that purpose more deeply. And the same thing with your personal purpose, right? You can continue discover your own personal purpose your whole life, even if you're going to be 200 years now with a new longevity research, you're going to be that old, maybe. So we're living, how many of you have heard about the VUCA world? Yeah, the majority in the room, VUCA, volatile, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that has been like a consultant buzzword for the last, 10 years in organization. We're living in the VUCA world. So now we have a new one called the Bani world. So Bani is Jamie Caskio. Jamie Caskio is on the top 100 list on the most influential people in the world. And he says that the VUCA is not really preparing us for the future that will come. So, and it's not really explaining the future that will come. So he talks about Barney. So let me go through it a little bit quickly. So B, brittle, is fragile. That comes from our quest of squeezing out everything in every system. Human beings, money, power, nature, efficiency. The quest for efficiency has been amazing the last 150 years, and especially last 30 years. Every organization I work with talk about operation excellence. Every organization, how can we be more effective? Sooner or later, your system will be very fragile. So even if it looks like a robust system, look at the banks, what's happening now in US and in Switzerland. It goes like this quick. Overnight, suddenly collapse. So it looks very robust, it's not. So we're living in this kind of brittle world. So what is the antidote for this? It's really building resilience. That's why we talk so much about resilience today. Communication throughout the organization. How do we have a B plan? So if this doesn't work, how can we switch over to a next plan if we're living in this kind of brittle world? How do we build collaborative culture where collaboration across the organization is much greater than it is today, which is a lot of complexity. The second one is anxious. So we can look at the world in terms of psychopharmaca, anxiety, sick leave, depending on burnout and so forth. That is one dimension. Another dimension would be in organizations, are we making the right choices? Is this the right choice? Oh, really? Are you sure? No? Are you? No? We're not sure if we make the right choices. So if we're living in an anxious world, we need to bring in mindfulness in organizations. We need to bring in more compassion into organizations. We need to allow people to do the work that you've been doing, allowing people to do inner work, to look inwards. That's how you deal with anxious organizations. Non-linear. Many organizations, if we find a process for this, we will fix it. We are very obsessed with processes and things that will fix it. If you're living in a non-linear world, that is not working. What is happening in Ukraine now, war is non-linear. It's going in one direction and then suddenly in another direction. So how do we deal with it? It's really about your ability to be adaptive, of course. Your ability to set meaningful context. As a leader, how do you set a meaningful context? And then the last one is incomprehensible. It's not ambiguity anymore, it's incomprehensible. Maybe you have said, I don't believe it. I don't understand how it could be like that. I say that many times, every week actually, to my wife. It's incredible. I don't believe it. How is this possible? So how do we deal with living in an incomprehensible world? Is really using AI, big data, but also in terms of leadership teams, your sensing skill, intuition. How do you build up that capacity? What are you sensing? Very, very important today. So a little bit scary living in this world. And at the same time, we now have moved out. We talk about that we're living in perma-crisis. We're living in the time and the era of perma-crisis. So this is a report that came out late 2021 from McKinsey in US. This is US. Maybe not totally applicable for Europe, but I think it is. So I think it's interesting what so many people start thinking and reflecting on what's the purpose of things? What's my purpose? So that is a deep conversation. It's a deepening conversation around that. I think the last one, when millennials actually start reflecting on what does work mean. And I was sitting in Bali a couple of weeks ago with a Chinese woman. And it was the first time in 3 years that she was outside of China. And she said, I'm super worried. My kids have been locked up inside our apartment for 3 years. They haven't been basically outside for 3 years. And now they don't want to talk to anyone. They don't want to have social interaction with anyone. And now in China there is a movement called Tangping, which is basically lay flat. Don't give a shit about anything. Do as little as possible so you just can survive and watch Netflix and, meaningless. So it's a very strong movement by young people in China. So I think we haven't seen actually the effects of COVID. We will see that maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, the effects of that still. Oh. So this one, do you recognize anyone who's in business here? Do you recognize yourself on that? Yeah? Yeah? Everyone recognize yourself? But what is happening now? This is what every organization... I don't meet any organization anywhere in the world right now that doesn't talk about how can we care more for our people, how can we, bringing more compassion. Well-being is a conversation, huge conversation. Diversity and inclusion, that has been a conversation for 10 years. Now it's coming back, but much stronger, much deeper conversation. We talk about meaning and purpose and an amor. I didn't hear top leaders talking about amor 10 years ago. I hear it now. I hear it in every intersection that I have with top teams today. The word amor comes up. And then I was sitting with 25 executives from different companies, and I showed this slide, and they said, well, yeah. We are only on this side. We are only on this side. And it was a little bit cynicism in the room. And then I said, well, is it a conversation? Yes, it's a conversation. We talk about it. But it hasn't manifested yet into the organizations. But we talk about it. I'm working with a big bank, and the new CEO came in and said, we're going to have a new value. Well, 3 new values, but one value was care. And this organization is the hardest culture I know. It's such a fear culture. And when they now talk about care, it also creates a lot of cynicism. How do you actually show that? It just becomes something like what we call a corporate frisbee. Yeah. So I always show these slides. Doesn't matter what I talk about, I always show slides. So this is a German photographer. He's out in Hudson Bay. And he's going to take some photos of some husky dogs that are stuck in a chain. No ice on Hudson Bay, so the polar bears comes into the villages and you're looking for food. So he's standing there with his camera, and suddenly this 600-kilo male bunny bear comes into the picture, this threat. And you see how the dogs react to that, become aggressive. This is what we see in the world right now. No one wants to belong to anyone. UK doesn't want to belong to Europe. Scotland doesn't want to be part of England or UK. Catalonia don't want to be part of Spain, right? So there is this kind of polarities, tensions, feels everywhere right now. And I think, how do we really develop leaders now to not react on the sirens of the extremists, what we see in the world right now? Religious fundamentalism, or authoritarian leaders like the Trump types or the Putin types, say, I will fix it for you. I will fix it for you, which we know is not going to work. So being aggressive when you have this kind of threat around you is fine. But it was one dog that had a different approach to this bunny bear, and it was a female dog. And she would start wagging her tail, and then something happened that I haven't seen before. They start to play. Yeah. So maybe some cynical people in the room, yeah. Then he ate her. No, actually, he came. That happens sometimes. They become food. But this particular bear, came for 2 weeks and played with the dogs. 2 weeks to play with the dogs and disappeared. So why do I show this picture? I think it's something around our ability now to bring in lightness and playfulness and depth. Holding that polarity of lightness and depth. I think these days when you're going to spend now together here, if you can create that when you're having a lot of fun and lightness and playfulness combined with depth, then it's going to be an amazing symposium, that's for sure. And I think we need to bring that into organization also. A lot of leaders that I meet today say, when you showed me that polar bear and the dog, I am that serious guy. I become so serious. I'm not playful anymore. I don't bring in any light into the organizations. I was that fun guy. I'm not that anymore. So we become very, very serious. And I think the systems that we are now living in is a new system that will emerge. I don't know if you listen to Peter Sehan. He's a very interesting guy. He's a geopolitical expert. He talks about, which I think is interesting, I think he talks about 25 to 30 years to create a new system for the world. 25 to 30 years. So we are here for the long run. It's not going to happen like that. Systems doesn't fall apart. They do that slowly. And now we're going to build something new. Your movement, this movement, is extremely important for that. So how do organizations deal with this kind of complexity that we are living in now? Normally adding on stuff. More KPIs, more reporting systems, more stuff, new value system, new vision. Here is the purpose statement. What do we do with it? Let's communicate. Let's communicate. And we bring top 200, top 300 into a room like this, and then corporate frisbee. What was that? Well, that was the new value system. What was that? Well, that's the new vision. Just flies over people's head. It doesn't land in people's heart. So we have a tendency to, don't get me wrong, KPIs, reporting, very valuable, but most organizations I meet doing too much. Even if it's been a conversation for the last 10 years, a word that I hear in every top team is simplicity. We're going to bring in simplicity, and no one is actually doing it. I think it's happening now. Actually. And what I think is wisdom and purpose is really cut through that complexity. It's a way of cutting through complexity is when you are able to bring in purpose in an organization, or you're bringing more wisdom into an organization. So, but it gives a perception that I'm in control, I'm steering my organization, and I crack the whip, and I go a little bit to the right. Now we're going to go a little bit to the left. So that's the perception of many leaders. Reality looks very different. This is reality for most organizations, so for most leaders. It's a heavy burden, moving your organization into direction. You're not that agile and fast and so forth. So you've probably seen the iceberg model metaphor in so many ways, but I think two things we talk about. The top of the iceberg will be strategy, underneath culture. Two things moves an iceberg: wind and current. Wind and current. So all the winds would be all the plans, the visions, the goals, the hard stuff. This is being a manager. This is what you learn in business schools. Dealing with the current is leadership. So that would be all the patterns, the habits, the fears, the emotions, the belief sets and so forth that we have in an organization that creates, with one word, would be culture. So so if the wind is going that direction and the current going that direction, where would the iceberg go? It's pretty obvious, right? It would go with the current. The current is so much stronger. Dealing with current is always leadership. If it's a relationship, if it's a team, if it's an organization or a civilization moving in a new direction, it's always leadership pushing that needle in a new direction. So that's why wisdom becomes more important. So when we started Oxford Leadership 25 years ago, the whole idea of purpose-driven organizations and purpose-driven leadership, the work that you've been doing for so many years, no one asked for it. We did it for 15 years before what's his name? TED talker. Simon Sinek and these guys, when they popped up. And then suddenly a lot of research around it came up, and the conscious capitalism movement with Rice Sodia in US popped up. So it just came so many researched, something that we've been knowing for thousands of years, that meaning, and we are meaning-seeking beings, right? But now we have also academia have, on the side, so they can explain, they can measure things and so forth, and then business says, whoa, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. And at the same time, in turbulent times, how do you find that eye of the storm? How do you find that individually, that place where it actually is peaceful? When you feel calm and when you feel relaxed, even if it's really turbulent around you, how do you find that? And of course, that is the core of that in the way we are looking at it, and I think you are also, is purpose. And it's whatever you want to call it. If you call it true north or your own truth or authentic self or purpose and values or whatever you want to call it, your soul, it's fine. Doesn't matter what kind of belief you have, it's the same thing. Every time I have met great leaders in my life, always been purpose-driven. Always leaning inwards when they're making choices and decisions. Always have a sense of the whole, and that is beyond themselves, always. And then you ask them, what's your purpose? I don't know. I don't have a clue. What's your values? Respect, integrity, I don't know. But what they know is that they are leaning into something that goes inwards when they're actually making choices and decisions. So this work, I think it's if we're going to see a more prosperous world, this is what we need much more of in the leadership field, much more. We are just in the beginning of that journey, I would say, even if we've been doing it for 25 years. So leadership, the way we're looking at leadership is personal. You all know that, right? Leadership is fundamentally about relationships. Fundamentally about relationships. And relationships is defined by the conversations that we have. The conversation. Actually, the conversation is the relationship. We all know that. Have you been in a bad relationship? Anyone? Yeah. No? Yeah? Yeah? Some of you? Very few, actually. Good. Well done. But if you've been in a bad relationship, your conversation stops, and then normally the relationship stops. So how do we bring in more meaningful conversations into business, into politics, and so forth? I think that's crucial. We also talk about context and choices. So context and choices, your ability to understand context, overviewing more complexity, becomes more and more crucial for a leader. How do we expand so we can understand context, and out of that context, then what are the choices that we make? So I think one critical question for any team, any organization today is how do we make good choices faster together? How do we do that? When we don't know. When we don't know, because we are navigating in fog. Most organizations do, actually. We're navigating in fog. So leadership is personal. Leadership always comes from within. So all the good stuff that we see, all the good stuff that we see in the world that is manifested started within someone. All the shit that we see in the world started inside someone. And then it has a ripple effect and it manifests in bad stuff and good stuff. So how do we make people actually making better choices? And I think one of the things is to tap into your innate wisdom. So 1.5 years ago, we decided of what would be the next tier for us. We've been talking about purpose for 25 years. Okay, we pushed down the flag into the sand and said, well, it's going to be around wisdom. And it's going to be around leadership wisdom. We are 150 consultants in 26 countries. Everybody is super confused, including me. So how do we talk about wisdom? We don't want to tell anyone what wisdom means. I'm not able to hold that conversation. Because when you actually say, what is wisdom? That's a lobster trap. You go in and you can never come out. But what we're talking about is a leadership wisdom framework. So how can we create a framework where everyone, and how can we democratize that? So much more people, not just the top of leaders, but how can we democratize it so many can actually tap into their innate wisdom and also be inspired by wisdom from outside. And I think what I really love is Ken Wilber's description of how do you expand as a human being. I don't know, you know Ken Wilber? No? Wilber? Yeah. He's really no fun to listen to. He's very boring to listen to, but very complicated. But anyway, he talks about 4 things. He talks about waking up. Waking up. That's your spiritual awakening. So that can be actually stages of that. He talks about 3 or 4 stages of that. Then he talks about growing up. And that is your ability to deal with complexity and your ability to care. Care is something that is expandable, right? Same thing with how can I look into much more take in more different perspectives. So that is basically vertical development of leaders. It's linked to adult development and so forth. That's growing up. Then he talks about cleaning up. How do I minimize my shadow side? How do I minimize my shadow side? It's not going to go away, but how do I minimize that side? And then he talks about showing up. So if I'm waking up, growing up, cleaning up, how do I show up for myself, but also for you guys? How do I show up? So really, what is necessary now, I think, is to tap into our collective wisdom. How do we tap into that? And let me end with a story. You talked about Mother Teresa. Who was it that have been working with or been close to Mother Teresa? Where is? Yes. So let me throw myself out there. I have this story that I would like to share because I heard it 20 years ago from Brian Bacon, who was the founder of Oxford Leadership. And he was in a seminar in San Francisco. And I think the title was The Engineering of Leadership and Change. I don't know if you remember in the 90s, everything was engineering. Yeah? Everything was engineering. So it was engineering, leadership and change. And it was all like the Peter Drucker, all the gurus in leadership was there. And Brian was one of the, who is he category. But anyway, after that seminar, it was like amazing evaluation. From a scale 1 to 10, it was 9 and 10, and it was just everybody has super good evaluation. But one person had 15 and 20 in the evaluation, and that was Mother Teresa. And what does she do in a seminar like this? But she was, I think, in San Francisco to do some kind of celebration for UN. And the organizers have just told her, if you can come and just send a message. Send a message. So she did a 2-minute speech, basically. So she came up on stage, and she stood in silence and looked at everybody. It was 1,000 people in the audience, didn't say anything, just looked at everyone in silence. And after a while, it becomes a little bit uncomfortable. You are in a speaking event, say something, And then she said, well, they told me to come here to talk about leadership and change. I don't know anything about leadership and change. But I know one thing. You need to know your people, and you need to love them. Because if you don't know your people, there will be no trust. And if there is no trust, people will not take any risks. And if people don't take any risks, there will be no change. And you need to love your people. Because if you don't love your people, there will be no passion. And if there is no passion, there will be no power. And if there's no power, well, there will be no change. And maybe I will end with that. Maybe it's that simple. Maybe it's that simple. And maybe that's what we need to do, the work around purpose, around wisdom. How do we bring that in to clear the fog? And I just want to say congratulations in advance to all the successes in the future, and thank you very much. Thank you.
My hack.
Oh, yes, of course.
Thanks, right, Lasse.
Great. Thank you. I have one more slide. Oh, can I go back? I have one more slide. I just want to ask one question. Yes, this one.
Go ahead.
So, who wants to be a leader? Let's see. Yeah, good on you. You're smiling also. This is really good. Maybe some think that is a very stupid question because you sit now and thinking, I was born a leader. You know, maybe you have that, but really this is an important question because if you say yes to this, and a lot of you smiled when you did this, it's actually the consequences of saying yes to be a leader of today is that you're going to have a bloody nose. You're going to challenge the status quo. Not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But it's well needed. So good that so many raised your hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Lasse.
Thank you.